Okay, here we go. Second. Okay. I went shopping at Osherat today, so if anything of this makes sense, that's a miracle. It was quite a crazy experience. I definitely recommend you go as early in the morning as possible if you're planning on going. And there once was a father, because it seems the theme of Pesach, there's two main themes. I would say there's education and there is freedom, right? Those are the two themes that Pesach really revolves around. So there was once a father, a young father, who was coming home to his family after a long day at work. He's a lawyer. He comes home, he has his briefcase, he has a suit and tie, and he walks into the house. And right away, as he's coming towards the front door, he sees something is wrong. He sees muddy little footprints leading up to the front door. He sees on the mat, there's dirt, there's sand. The door is a little bit ajar, the door is open. He comes inside, the house is like a tornado, like a hurricane. The couch, the floor, everything, dirt. He goes to the backyard and he sees his kid sitting and playing in mud. And he asks them, he says, "Where's mommy?" He has 3 kids. "Where's mommy?" And they say, "We don't know." And he goes, he's looking in the house. He goes upstairs and his wife is sitting. She's curled up with a book and a cup of tea and she's very relaxed. And he says, "Honey," he says, "what's going on?" And she looks at him very calmly. She says, "You know how you always come home and say to me, 'What in the world did you do today?'" And he says, "Yes." She says, "Well, today I didn't do it." So education is really the theme over here. And I want to share with you a very short story from Rabbi Lord Dr. Jonathan Sachs, which really brings out this idea tremendously. Rabbi Sachs, someone was just telling me he was literally a rock star. They were part of his, everywhere he would go, he would bring a choir with him. And it was like he was a celebrity. He was really a celebrity, like a whole different level. And one time he was invited to have lunch with the Prime Minister of England, one-on-one. The problem is that the invite to have lunch with the Prime Minister conflicted with another invite that he had, which was the opening ceremony of a new Jewish day school in London. What did he do? He decided not to go to the Prime Minister and instead to attend the ceremony of the new Jewish day school. When they asked him why, he said, because governments sustain societies, but education sustains the world. So over here, when we have on Pesach the opportunity to sit with our children and grandchildren, if we're blessed enough to have that situation. If we're not with children and grandchildren or any children, we have each other, we can still educate ourselves. This holiday is the central moment of education of the Jewish people for the year. It is the most practiced custom, like Rabbi Weunsch said, it's the most printed, the Haggadah is the most printed book. For some reason, Pesach is the most Jewish thing that we do. More than Yom Kippur, more than Rosh Hashanah, more than Hanukkah, more than anything else. It seems to be there is an obsession with Pesach. So when we sit down by our Seders, I want to share with you a beautiful Hasidic idea. It's actually in a Hayom Yom. It says that every person, the Baal Tanya, the Alter Rebbe, he writes that every person has 2 souls. He has a godly soul and an animal soul, right? And that's why sometimes we feel a little bit bipolar, is because there actually is 2 parts of us that are constantly fighting for control of the castle. Now, what's interesting is that when 2 people sit together, you say that there's 2 godly souls against 1 animal soul. Why is that? It's because the animal souls can't work together. They're selfish. They can't unite. But the godly souls, they unite. So when you sit down with other people, automatically your godly souls all bind together. So we're sitting down by our Seder. Number one, we should realize is we're all uniting together. Something I saw someone said, which was brilliant. I think it was Rabbi Jacobson. He said somebody once came to him and they said, this year for Pesach, I wrote up so many Dvar Torahs. I found so many Purushim from the Maharal and the Balaturim and all these great stuff. I'm so excited for my Seder with my grandkids. I'm going to teach them so much. Rabbi Jacobson told him, sir, I don't think that's such a good idea. Because when you're sitting down by your Seder, sometimes we focus so much on giving that we don't realize enough on the receiving, right? We don't realize enough on being in tune with who our audience is and who we're sitting next to. So it's very important is when we're sitting by the Seder that we unite together and we join as one. I want to share with you an article that I read, which was written in January 15th of this year by a kid named Shirley Fruchter. I think he's about in his 18, 19 years old. And he wrote this article for one of the mainstream newspapers, and I actually got the article. Someone sent it to me and said it's unbelievable. But it's nice because you hear a perspective of a very young, what does the younger generation think after October 7th? What does the younger generation think after Simchat Torah? And he actually writes himself, he says, I'm a boy who didn't go through the second Intifada. He never went through the Crown Heights riots. He never went through the Soviet Jewry plight. He never went through all these different moments in history. And to him, it's like, is this the Holocaust? Is this what they were talking about when they said Jews at the pogrom? Is this what this is? He doesn't know. So he starts off his article and he writes like this. He quotes the first source, Shmos Aleph, Parak Aleph, Pasuk Tes and Pasuk Yud. It sounds like this. The Jewish people are more numerous and mightier than us. Let's outsmart them in case they grow, declare war, join our enemies, and rise from the land. And he writes, he says, this was not scraped off of Twitter or X or whatever it's called, or Instagram or 4chan, or something written at a Times Square rally from Hamas, pro-Hamas protesters. This was something which was written in the book of Exodus, in the story of the Exodus. And he said what he realized is that so many people, when it comes to a time like this of war, we hyper-consume content of the news, right? I'm sure this past Saturday night, unless you really are somebody who knows how to like just meditate to another level, I mean, literally, someone said it to me very put it perfectly. He said, usually you check your phone to see when your flight's going to be arriving, what time is the flight taking off. This past Saturday night, we were checking when are the rockets arriving, right? They're taking off in a few hours. It was the most bizarre thing in the whole world. I don't think that, that's probably why Iran never attacked before. It's literally, you have like a 3-hour warning before the rockets would come. He's saying in those moments, when you feel completely helpless, when you feel despair, when you feel darkness, where do you turn? And he took it even a step further. He quoted an author, an Israeli author, whose name is Yossi Klein. Excuse me, let me see where it is over here. He says like this, Yossi Klein Halevi. He said in the podcast, what October 7th represents, I think for Israelis, is a violation of Zionism's promise to the Jewish people to create a safe refuge. And this goes to the heart of the Israeli ethos. So he said to himself as a young boy, if we don't have any of these things, what can save us? What can protect us? And he said, I looked somewhere that I never thought to look before, and none of my friends thought to look before. The Torah. When you look in the Torah, you see that the story of the Jewish people is not a story of darkness. Something you see in Jewish law is that the day does not start when the sun rises. The day starts at night in Jewish tradition. We know that. When we have the creation of the world, it says, Vayhi Erev, Vayhi Voker. Right? First there was evening, and then there was morning. That is what the Torah tells us. We are not a story of despair. We are not a story of pain. We are a story of constantly rising again and again and again. What's interesting is when the Russia comes, like Rabbi Weunsch was saying, the rebellious son, when he comes, he's very scary. He's very scary because he makes us very uncomfortable. Because usually what happens is, for most people on their Jewish journey, is that we find a place where we're comfortable, and then we sort of coast, right? We don't live our whole lives. Unfortunately, most of us do not live every day growing from the next to the next to the next. We find a comfortable spot and we coast along. The Russia comes along and he pokes in the uncomfortable places, and he knows exactly where to poke. And actually, I saw from Sivan Rachav Meir a beautiful insight. If you look at Safon, it says that by Safon is when we have the whole custom of hiding the Afikomen. Why, when it comes to this major educational moment, hiding the Afikomen and finding the Afikomen, why is it like this? Why is it hiding and finding and stealing? Why is it like this? It's because our children, they can sense way beyond what we say. We can tell them this is what you need to do, this is the proper path, this is what your parents did, this is what you have to do or else you get punished. We can tell them and tell them and tell them. But they can sense what is under the surface. And especially the rebellious son seems to have a special knack for finding the most uncomfortable places and poking them over and over again. What does the Vilna Gaon say? A beautiful insight. If you look at the gematria, the numerical value of the word Russia, it comes out to the number 570. How do we respond to the Russia? We say, Hake Ashina. You have to knock out his teeth, right? So most dads, after dealing with this rebellious kid for a long time, they're like, fantastic. You see, honey, what it says in the Haggadah? Let's take out his teeth. I'm telling you, I've been waiting, but that's what we got to do. But no. The Vilna Gaon says, what is the number? What's Shinov? What does Shinov represent? Shinov is the numerical value of 366. If you take 570, if you take Russia minus his teeth, you get the number 206, which is what? Is tzaddik. Which means the Russia, he's not coming from a bad place. For whatever reason, he's a kid who likes to ask questions. He's a kid who likes to attack. He's a kid who likes to go deeper. The Vilna Gaon says, just blunt his teeth. If you can handle the pain of his bite, which seems to be very scary, he has a beautiful heart. He has a just as good a heart as the tzaddik. But his teeth are a little bit scarier. Take away the teeth, and you have a tzaddik. That's what the Vilna Gaon tells us. There's a beautiful insight from Rav Kook, which actually is said clearly in the Haggadah, but Rav Kook puts it very well. He says like this: in truth, with penetrating consciousness, we come to know that the essence of the Exodus is an act that never ends at all. Which, if you look in the Haggadah, we have the famous word, B'chol dar vadar, chayav adam liros et atzmo keilu hu yatsa mimitzrayim. In every generation, a person must see himself as if he is going out of Egypt. Now, today, I don't think it's ever been more relevant in recent Jewish history where we actually understand what this means. When it comes to our Seder tables, the children do not understand what's going on. The children only understand meaning I can tell you, for example, my younger brother, he's a teenager. What was the most exciting thing to him that has happened in this whole war is that he read on the news yesterday that Saudi Arabia participated in the defense of Israel. He was so excited. He said, that's amazing. Saudi Arabia protected Israel. He's like, that's incredible. That's so mind-blowing. But we need to teach the teenagers Saudi Arabia is wonderful and that we understand we need a treaty with them and maybe that's why the whole war happened and all those things are important. And all these physical things are important. But do not forget the story of our people. The whole Dover in every generation, do not forget that we have one thing that we rely on, and that is Hashem. That is from the Torah. To look in the Torah and to see the story of the Jewish people. Today it might be darkness, but we know next week we're going to talk about liberty and freedom. There's a story, a beautiful story, of a professor named Belleville Green. I actually like to say the story a lot. It's one of my favorite stories. He was a rocket scientist who was Makarev. Rabbi Weiss took my Chabad Lubavitch slot over here. He already quoted the Lubavitch Rabbi, but I'm going to quote him again. And he was the guy who was Makarev to Judaism, to observant Judaism, through a shliach named Rabbi Moshe Feller. Now, he was a very, very sharp man. You could read about Rabbi Belleville Green. He was a tough, intense, very sharp individual. He even had an encounter with the Rebbe where the Rebbe wrote something about science, and he basically wrote back to the Rebbe, stick to Torah. And the Rebbe didn't respond. The Rebbe didn't respond to him. He didn't know at the time that the Rebbe had a full university education. The Rebbe actually later on, years later, the Rebbe ignored his message, and years later, the Rebbe responded to him. And the Rebbe said, my job is not to win arguments. My job is to bring Jews closer to the Torah. So it wasn't relevant at the time to argue with you. And in the end, Dr. Green, who was a man of science, gave in to the Rebbe's argument. But that's not the story I'm telling. It's a different story. Professor Green was once at a rocket science conference, literally, a NASA conference. And one of the professors got up and he wanted to discuss a theoretical situation. He said, we know the furthest star is this and that. I forgot, some Greek Latin name, right? Alcalon, Ally, I'm not sure what it is. The furthest star in the galaxy that we know. He says, if we were, this entire is a theoretical question. He said, if we were to be able to create a rocket that could go to this star, it would have to be a rocket that would be people would be able to give birth on the rocket. Why? The trip would take 800 years if they were going at like the speed of light, right? That's all theoretical. And it would take 800 years. And he said to the crowd, he said, let's say we would be able to make a hospital on the ship that we could have a couple go on and they would give birth and we would have to figure out how they would be able to get married because it would be a problem. And we'd figure out all these different issues, these crazy issues. He said to them like this, all those issues, how to have children, how are the children going to get married, how are they going to have food, all those issues I think we could sit here and figure out. He said, I have one issue that theoretically speaking, I have not been able to find the answer to this question. And he said like this, how is it possible after 800 years that those children that get to the star are going to care about coming back to Earth? In 800 years, they're going to say, Earth, what are you even talking about? Right? It's like the famous parable of the family who grows up in the pit. They don't know. Their mother tells them about a world where there's green trees and green. They don't know what they're talking about. So in 800 years, why is the astronaut going to say, we get to the star, we're going to go back to Earth? What's Earth? I don't know who you're going to earth. What is that? So he said, if anybody has an answer to this question, maybe one day we could have this mission. One of the guys gets up in the room. It was not Professor Green. It was not a Jewish professor. A Jewish professor raises his hands and he says, I do not know the answer to this question, but we can ask the Jews. That's what he said. And this question of how the Jewish people have continued for so long is a question which has baffled every historian and everyone in the whole world. How could this tiny nation continue again and again and again? Sometimes we ask as Jewish people, how come we keep getting pogroms? How come we keep getting holocausts? How come we keep getting persecuted? But people don't ask, how do we keep getting back up? The reason why the Jews have been through so many genocides is because we keep getting back up. Every other civilization gets attacked, falls apart, and then there's a new civilization. So there is no civilization that can ask all these questions because we are the only ones who keep rising again and again and again. So Rabbi Lord Dr. Jonathan Sachs brings a beautiful answer to this question, which I believe almost every Jewish sage across the spectrum will agree that this is the answer. This is our secret sauce that nobody has been able to replicate the same way. If you look at the story of the Jewish people going out of Egypt, I actually, for some reason, didn't take a source sheet. So I don't know what source number it is. If you look at the story of the Jewish people going out of Egypt, you will see that Moshe Rabbeinu, before they leave Egypt, before they get out, they're still slaves. Moshe Rabbeinu tells them 3 times that you must remember to tell your children the story. So you would think to slaves, meaning just imagine slaves. We have all seen slave movies, right? A slave is somebody who's impoverished, who does not understand freedom, who has been tormented, who has been beaten down, right? We know from history that one of the hardest things is not to leave slavery. It's to leave the slave mentality. So you would think, now that we know the slave mentality is so hard to leave, and Moshe Rabbeinu was a brilliant man and a great leader, and he had God on his side, wouldn't you think the first thing to tell the slaves would be about the promised land, would be about what life is like as a free person, would be how to train them to rethink their mind? He says, no, no, no. He says, make sure you tell the story to your children. Because Moshe Rabbeinu knows there's no point in going out of Egypt if you're not going to tell the story to your kids. Because if you don't tell the story to your kids, there's not going to be Jews next generation. There's no point to this whole charade. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, make sure to tell the story to your children 3 times. We know Rabbi Akiva said that a person could learn from 1 crown of the Torah, an ocean of Torah. 3 times Moshe Rabbeinu repeats it again and again and again. If you see, the first one is in Perikut Beis, Pasuk Chavav and Pasuk of Zion, chapter 12, verse 26, 27. And when your children ask you, what do you mean by this rite? You will say it is the Passover sacrifice to Hashem who passed over the house of the Israelites in Egypt while smiting the Egyptians, but saved our houses. Vigad Talavincha, chapter 13, verse 8, chapter 13, verse 14, 6 verses later. And when in time to come a child of yours asks you, saying, what does this mean? You shall reply, it is with a mighty hand that Hashem brought us from Egypt, the house of bondage. Rabbi Sachs takes it a step further. He says that over here, we need to ask the 3 fundamental questions that every single person should be able to answer. And I will tell you, this might seem obvious. When you hear these 3 questions, this might seem obvious to you. But if you will speak today, very unfortunately, call over, stop a kid in the street who's 14 years old, 15 years old, who's walking around New York City, Miami, Los Angeles. Ask a 15-year-old these 3 questions. And I would love to hear the answer that he gives you. Because I'll tell you, you might be shocked in a very sad way that people today are confused. And we see this has happened in history, but especially the younger generation has been pulled in so many different directions with all these different apps and social media and this and that, that it's like a whole mishkababel salad, right? So over here he says like this: who am I? Why am I here? And how then shall I live? These are the 3 questions that every single person should ask themselves in their life. If it has to be every day, once a year by Pesach is probably good enough. So he says like this: number 1, who are we? We are a member of the people God freed from Egypt and chose as his nation. Number 2, I am here to create a dwelling place for God in a way that I can only as proof of my mere existence in this world by making it a better place. Number 3, I shall live according to the clear and vast directives of the Torah, our sages, to guide me through the jungle of this world. Something that we know today is that you cannot trust anyone. If we thought that before October 7th, I'm not saying conspiracy theorist, I'm not saying you can't trust, I'm not going to get into vaccines or this or that, but you cannot trust anyone. If you think any government is going to back you up, if you think it's going to be this politician you can put all your trust in, and frankly, by the way, I think that's why there's such a pandemonium in Israel to get Bibi. It's a confusion. Who is your boss? Your boss is not Bibi Netanyahu. Bibi Netanyahu is not the king of Israel. There is a king of Eretz Yisrael, and it's not Bibi Netanyahu. It's God. Don't worry, Atah Harosh, Atah Hasham. Okay, fine, so he's guilty. So you'll remove Bibi and you'll put, I don't know, I'm not gonna get into politics, but I'm not sure that there's so many other, what are you gonna do? Not gonna get into politics now. We'll stay off that subject. But I don't know anything about it. What I'm saying is just to realize that you can only put your trust in one entity. And Rabbi Sachs actually sees how over history this has happened before. In the 17th and 18th centuries, they had the Enlightenment movement. They wanted to take away this whole idea of identity, right? Everybody's the same. We don't have to all be so rigid and say, I'm this and you're that, to create divides between us in society. Let's remove identity. And then they tried to replace identity with systems like science, art, philosophy, and say that, in this world, we can all be together. There could be no separation between people. Comes along the 19th and 20th century, and 100 million people were killed. Why? Because of racism in the Holocaust, because of nation states in the world wars, and because of class trouble by Stalin with the gulags. 100 million people died because we couldn't understand that identity is a fact of human nature. It is a fact of who we are. And if we do not know who we are, that is the most dangerous, crumbling part of society. A lot of people joke of people not understanding who they are in the most basic sense today. Forget Jews. People have identity crises on the most basic levels. This is a very, very dangerous symptom of a society falling apart. So the question is, why did this happen? Right? That's the next thing the child is going to ask. Forget who am I? Why are we here? Why did this happen? Why did October 7th happen? So I would personally say, and I think most people would say the answer to this question is, we have no idea. If we knew the answer to that question, we would be angels. If we knew why something like October 7th happened, we would know the answer to death. And nobody knows the answer to death. There's many different pirushim, and there's many different explanations. I'm not taking away from that. But if somebody comes to you, especially your child, and says, why did October 7th happen? They're not looking for you to answer. Some people would say, it's because of this, because of that. If you tell that to your child, they're not looking for an actual answer. You have to answer the person, not the question that they're asking. What are they asking you? They're asking for empathy. They're asking for love. They feel lost in a world where civilians were killed and murdered and raped and kidnapped. So they want to know, they want to feel love, they want to feel emotions. Today, the emotional intelligence is very, very important. But I will tell you like this. This is not an answer to that question. This is something to strengthen us, to be very clear. In the story of the Exodus, one of the parshiot, which discusses the Exodus, is the parsha of Bo. Right? Famously, Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Bo el Paro, come to Paro. Now, there's a very simple question on this verse. If you actually look in the source, it doesn't make any grammatical sense. And when that happens, the way you know something is fishy in a verse is that the translators just ignore it. They translate Bo el Paro as go to Paro. But any of us who have been to Ulpan know that Bo does not mean go. Bo means come. So the question is, if Hashem is in one place and Paro is in Egypt and he's talking to Moshe and he says, go to Paro, he should have said later. Why did he say Bo? Because Bo, Hashem was telling Moshe Rabbeinu, there's something very scary that you need to know right in the beginning of this. He said, I am with you and I am the head of the Jewish people, but I am also Paro. There's not another creator of this world. I am the only God in this world. And there's going to be challenges. And I made those challenges. Make no mistake. There's not a second God. There's not me and the devil and we're sharing this. It's not Paro as the devil. I also created Paro. But you can overcome that challenge. The reason that challenges exist is for us to be able to overcome them. And you might say that's sadistic. You might say that's sick. But I would say to imagine a world with no challenges. Imagine there was no challenge. Imagine every day was easy. You had no stress, no anxiety. Imagine you never worked out. What's working out? Working out is breaking your muscles for them to be able to heal back and grow stronger. Imagine every day you had everything you need of financially. Your children were all nachas machines. Every time your kids came, you said, wow, look at them. You could send pictures in all the WhatsApp chats and look at my kids and my grandkids. Baruch Hashem, Shalom Yisrael. What kind of a world would that be? It wouldn't be a world. It would be nothing. It would be just angels, but that's not what Hashem created. For some reason, this is the reality that we live in. And what we can do is, like the Rav said, is not say lama, but say lama. Is how can we use this as a stepping stool to become stronger and to move forward? And we see this actually in a few different sources, this idea of that in the darkness, there's always light. If you look at Machas Choshech, Rashi comes and he says from the Midrash that there was two reasons for Machas Choshech. Number one is because Hashem did not want those who were not going out of Egypt to be seen when they were being punished. We know that 80% of the Jewish people did not go out of Egypt. Only 20% of the Jewish people went out of Egypt. So what did Hashem do? How did Hashem punish the sinners, the ones who were not meant to go out? He did it during the plague of darkness so that nobody would see. It would be hidden. So that sounds like evil. That sounds like bad, darkness. But at the same time, it was also for the Jewish people to be able to get the riches of the Egyptians. So we see this idea of a mix of darkness and light. In addition to that, we have a question. Why is there exile? Why are we in this galut, right? We say there's going to be a Mashiach and a final redemption. Why are we in exile? So if you look in the Talmud, in Tractate Nedarim, it says a question. What did Avram Avinu do that his children deserve to be in exile for 210 years? Which obviously implies that exile is a punishment. So what's the reason for exile, we could say, is punishment. But then if you look at the second verse of the Torah, it says, Va'aretz harsatohu vavohu v'choshech al pnei tehom v'ruach Elokim arachefes al hamayim, which means that in the beginning of creation, before there was any action, before anybody did anything, there was darkness. It was created as a fabric and a part of this world. Before anybody sinned, darkness was made. So what does this tell us? What do we answer? How do we end off with this? Is if you look in Devarim, it uses the term Kor HaBarzel. Kor HaBarzel is like a gold refinery. How do you make gold? Is with pressure, is with intense pressure. And you see, if you ever wanted to see this with your own eyes, I don't think living in Israel has ever been a better time to see this with your own eyes, unfortunately. That after October 7th, Simchas Torah, the way that this nation has come together, the way that the people have stepped up for each other has been nothing short of spectacular. And I want to end off tonight with a story. There's a survivor who was a hostage on October 7th, whose name is Sapir Cohen. She is an unbelievable woman that I very strongly suggest for you to Google her name later. She is an incredibly inspiring person. And this story will tell you everything you need to know about Sapir Cohen, or really just a little taste. Sapir Cohen, a month before October 7th, she felt like something bad was going to happen. She had a bad feeling. So what did she say to herself? She decided to go for a medical checkup. And sure enough, she had a certain virus. She had a certain issue that needed to be taken care of. So she decided, what was she going to do? She was not a particularly observant, Jewish Israeli woman. She said, I'm going to say one chapter of Tehillim every single day, a random chapter. Which chapter did she pick? Chapter 27. She said this chapter every single day to the point that she knew it completely by heart. This is actually the chapter that we say leading up to the holiday during Tishrei. We say LeDavid Hashem Ori, right? She didn't realize when she was reading this chapter every day that the chapter has nothing to do with illness. The chapter speaks all about war. And I actually put it in the source sheets. If you look at the English of LeDavid Hashem Ori, the chapter is all about Hashem saving you from war, but she didn't know this. So when she read it one day, and she did realize, she said to herself, that's so bizarre. Why would I pick a chapter that has anything to do with war? Meaning, right, I have a sickness. That's why I'm saying Tehillim. Sure enough, she is invited to Nir Oz for Simchat Torah. Her boyfriend, Sasha, did not want to go. And he actually almost canceled. He pushed her, and he said, I don't want to go. I'd rather stay home. He pushed her, and she said, no. We said, we're going. We have to go. So they decided they're going to Nir Oz for Simchat Torah. 6:30 in the morning. We all know how the story goes. There was booms, there was explosions. They went to the bomb shelter. Her mother, who's with them in the bomb shelter, gets a text that there is mechablim, there's terrorists in Kibbutz Be'eri. Now, actually, I personally, Hashkafa Pradis, I actually went to Nir Oz about 2 weeks ago, and they're very close to each other. And it's, meaning when you see it with your own eyes, it's like it's something you'll never forget in your whole life. She's in the bomb shelter, and they decide she hides under the bed. She wraps herself in a blanket, and she says she's literally shaking and pouring sweat like she never in her whole life. Terrified, you can imagine. Lo aleinu. Sure enough, after some time, she starts hearing screams, Allahu Akbar. She starts hearing these screams, and she realizes that something is seriously wrong, to the point she even hears the screams in the room. And she realizes that now she has to get up. She gets up, and she is taken. And there's actually a very famous photo of her on a motorcycle with one terrorist in the front and one terrorist in the back of her. And when she was taken into Gaza, she said, I had my head held high. Why? Because she saw all these civilians, innocent civilians, with their cameras on her face. And she said, at least the photo is going to get to my parents and they'll know that I was kidnapped. And she had her head held high the entire time. When she got in, people started beating her with bats and throwing cigarettes at her. So the terrorists didn't want her to be killed. They needed a live hostage. So they put a bag over her head and they protected her. When she was brought into her tunnel where she was being kept, she was there for a while. And she said that throughout the entire situation, she was laughing, she was smiling, she was happy. This is how she describes it. And she said this chapter of Tehillim every single day. Every single day. One day, she sees her terrorist captor, who's her, designated guy who's guarding her. She sees him draw on the wall this big picture of a candle with a flame that looks like a memorial candle, and he writes her name on it. So she actually felt, what she says in the story, it's so bizarre. She actually felt that they had a good relationship, that he was like her friend, that because she was so happy and she always managed to stay so upbeat in this situation, she felt like they had a good connection. So she actually confronted him and she said, what's that? Meaning, why are you writing on the wall that I'm dying? I'm not dying. I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be good or whatever. You know what he said to her? I'm going to quote you exactly her words. He said to her like this, I don't like you. You're my enemy and I don't like you. But when you are here, there is light. This is what the terrorist said to her. She couldn't believe what she heard. And sure enough, after reading this chapter of Tehillim every day, and she said she never lost faith for a moment, she was released, I believe, after 55 days of being a hostage. And she has spent since then going around. I saw her on social media for one organization. I saw her in a speech. And she has been a rock star, going around sharing her story of strength and bitachon to other Jewish people. So God willing, we can internalize this idea of after October 7th, Simchat Torah, to be able to have within ourselves a strong, unbreakable Jewish identity, to know who we are, to know who we rely on, and we, God willing, could give this over to our children and our children's children, and should be for many generations to come. Am Yisrael Chai.